When he gave me my homework assignment, he said, "Perhaps, sir, you will someday come back with books." A statement that would change my life forever.
From Mamma Mia, I'm Mia Friedman, and you're listening to No Filter, candid conversations that count. This is a special episode that we're releasing to celebrate International Day of the Girl. And just to be different, it's an interview with a man, which seems counterintuitive, but wait till you hear this story. John Wood was sitting at his desk in Beijing when he decided to blow up his life. He was 35, he was in a relationship, and he was working as a high-flying exec for Microsoft. But after he returned from a holiday trek in the Himalayas, John knew that he couldn't go on living the life that he'd so carefully built for himself. So he quit his job, he left his relationship, and he started all over again. And what did he do? Well, he decided that he wanted to change the lives of millions of kids living in some of the most disadvantaged places in the world. You might already know that Mamma Mia is a media company with one key purpose: to make the world a better place for women and girls. Every day we do that with our content, the written articles we make, the podcasts, but we also do it in more practical ways, along with our charity partner Room to Read, which is a charity started by John Wood. Nearly 1 in 12 adults around the world can't read or write, and 2/3 of those adults are female. And Room to Read is changing that by educating girls in the developing world. And we know, science has shown, research has proven that lifting girls and women out of poverty through education changes the future for entire families and entire communities. So how did this all start? Why was this John's passion? And what does this actually look like? How does it change lives? Well, here's John Wood. I want you to take me back to your life when you were 35 years old and working as a high-flying exec for Microsoft. What happened?
So I was fortunate to live and work in the region. I lived in Australia. I ran marketing for Microsoft Australia, eventually went to China with Microsoft to run business development. And I just reached this critical decision point one day where I had this passion to bring education to the poorest parts of the world, the places where kids were most marginalized and overlooked. And I had set up one little library in Nepal at the request of a headmaster in 1999. But I felt like one library in a world of 800 million illiterate people is a drop in the ocean.
You kind of glossed over that. I just set up one library in Nepal at the request of a headmaster. Now, how do you go from being a Microsoft exec in the 90s when things are pretty great? How did you even get to Nepal? How did you even get into a conversation with a headmaster?
Well, when I hit my 7-year anniversary with Microsoft, I had a little bit of a 7-year itch. I wanted to get away. And actually, I was in Sydney. One of the trekking companies was doing a slideshow, and they showed the Annapurna Circuit, this brilliant 18-day, 200-mile circumnavigation of these incredible mountains. And I joked with my friend Ben. I said, I think if you go high enough in the Himalayas, you can escape the sound of Steve Ballmer and Bill Gates yelling at you to work harder. And so I went off to Nepal to do this incredible 18-day trek. And on day 2, a local headmaster of a little school, the village of Bahundanda, Nepal, which changed my life forever, invited me to take a tour of the school. And I, as a kid, I was a total nerd. Like, I loved school. I loved my teachers. I loved my library. And when the headmaster showed me this school, it was like many schools in the developing world. It was simultaneously hopeful, but rather sad. Hopeful because 450 kids were showing up every day in their uniforms, ready to learn. Sad because the school had complete and total resource constraints, including an empty library. And I asked the headmaster...
An empty library. So what did they do? They just came and they sat at desks, or...?
They didn't really do anything. There was just this room where theoretically a library could have existed, but it was potential energy, not kinetic energy.
Yeah.
And I asked the headmaster, why are you missing books? And he said that in Nepal we're too poor to afford education, and we're too poor to afford books, but if this continues, we're just going to remain poor. One more generation will be uneducated. And I thought, how frustrating would it be to be a teacher or a parent and to watch your kids fail? I mean, this is the lack of education for the developing world is nothing more than planned poverty. You let this perpetuate, then one more generation, every generation is going to live in poverty. We shouldn't be surprised by that.
Because it's the only way out, right? Is through education and reading and writing.
Especially for girls and women.
Why more for girls and women?
Well, I think that when you look at studies, studies show that for every year that a woman in a developing world, for every year of additional education she gets over and above the norm, her eventual wages increase by 15 to 20%. So if she goes through 5 or 6 or 7 extra years of schooling, her eventual wages will double or triple.
And when you say the norm, what is the norm in many cases? What age?
The norm is failure, unfortunately. I mean, in rural Zambia, 4 out of 5 girls don't make it past grade 7. And as a product myself of an educated mother and educated grandmother, I mean, I'm successful in life partly because these educated women were the ones who reared me. So it's, to me, it's not just a women's issue. It's a human rights issue. It's every man should care as much as every woman.
So 80% of girls don't make it past high school.
Yeah, don't make it past even grade 7 or 8.
Yeah. And what does that condemn them to in terms of the opportunities that they have or don't have without that further education?
Yeah, without education, they're not empowered. They don't have the self-confidence. Obviously, the best thing you can do for any young woman is help her to get to the point where she's making money, where she's the breadwinner. Because with the breadwinning comes that degree of control over
and financial
over her
independence,
life.
And she can leave a man if he beats her or if he dies, or she doesn't have to have a baby just to be looked after.
Yeah, and it's a key thing that we try to make sure that every young woman in our program learns is the benefits of delaying marriage, the benefits of having fewer children, the benefits of sticking with their education through secondary or possibly through university, tertiary, and then absolutely great things happen. I mean, we have room to read graduates. I mean, I know one young woman in Vietnam, Tay T. She has come to our wine galas, and she's just gotten standing ovations, right? She's from this rural village in the Mekong Delta.
So she comes to a black tie fancy do and gets in front of all these rich people and speaks.
Yeah, and 5 years ago, she was in a pair of boots trying to fish out river crabs to help fund her education. And she told me this story once where she said the village she lived in was about an hour south of Ho Chi Minh City. And she said one night, it was New Year, the Western New Year, and she was out catching river crabs, like in the mud, trying to fill pails with river crabs. And she was watching in the distance, all of a sudden these fireworks went off. And she said to herself, she said, those fireworks are not for people like me. Those fireworks are for people who don't have to work at midnight catching river crabs. Now, she's a teacher. She teaches English. I've been in her classroom several times in the Mekong Delta. She's got 300 eager 5th, 6th, and 7th grade teachers, and they all look up to Tay T because she's their teacher. Now, Tay T's come to 4 of our wine galas, and it's awesome because when she tells her story of going from this poor family, fighting her parents when her parents tried to force her to drop out of school, she refused. Her parents burned her homework and burned her books to try to force her to leave school. And she said to them, no, defiantly, if you want me to take care of you in your old age, I have to have a real job.
As you say, that the key to pulling whole communities out of poverty and families out of poverty, I've learnt this since we started partnering with Room to Read. Girls and women are the key, aren't they?
They really are, because if you look at studies, they show that for every time a woman in the developing world earns a marginal dollar, she spends 90% of it on the family: food, clothing, shelter, education. Men were not quite as enlightened in how we spend that marginal dollar.
John, I'm shocked. So back to Nepal, you were in that little room talking to that headmaster. Was he quite accepting of the situation, or was he like asking you to help him directly, or what was the feeling like in that empty library?
I think he had not yet lost his confidence that things could change. Now, I'm thoroughly convinced I'm not the first trekker who was invited into his school. But when he gave me my homework assignment, he said, perhaps, sir, you will someday come back with books. A statement that would change my life forever. A statement that would cost me a lot of money because it eventually forced me to abandon my high-paying job. But I said I would help him, and one of the teachers said, we see a lot of you trekkers, and a lot of you tell us you'll help us, and we never see you again. And that was like,
burn.
I was like throwing down the gauntlet, man. I was like, listen, pal, I'm going to be back within a year. And I eventually met that teacher and the headmaster again. A year later, I went back with 3,000 books on the back of 6 rented donkeys. So we had 500 books per donkey, which I believe is still within the acceptable limits of the book-to-donkey ratio.
Phew.
And my 73-year-old father was with me because he needed a retirement project, and my mother needed him to have a retirement project to get him out of the house for a few weeks. And it was just the most happy day that I had ever had in my life, because all these kids who had never seen brightly colored children's books before were literally, it was like a mosh pit. The kids were stage diving onto the books. And I had headmasters thanking us. We had mothers and grandmothers like holding our hands and crying to say thank you for helping our children. And I said to my dad that night, I'm like, we just did so little. Like that was easy. That was a one-off. And I don't want this to be a one-off. I want this to be something that's huge, something that we can take it to 100 libraries, 1,000 libraries, 10,000 libraries.
So you took the books back, and then did you think, this feels good, I can see the change that it makes? You still are a high-flying exec at Microsoft, though. It's still only $19.99. What happens next?
Well, I would say that when I left that little school, it was with a really heavy heart because I had met other headmasters. There were headmasters who'd walked 3 or 4 hours from other villages to meet me, and they handed me what they called petitions, e.g., a very friendly letter, usually kind of in BBC influenced English. So one headmaster member said, I wish to inculcate in my children the habit of reading, but I have no books. And I'm thinking any headmaster who can use the word inculcate in a sentence with a straight face deserves better. And so in my brain, I wanted to go trek from village to village to village and meet those students and help those headmasters. But I was actually starting my ride back to Beijing, back to being director of business development for Microsoft China, back to a relationship that was no longer going to work for me because the person I was with at the time was not going to embrace this whole notion of giving up the high-flying, lucrative job to go be a do-gooder with donkeys and yaks in the Himalayas. So heading back to Beijing was really tough because I knew that I was just going to have to completely blow up my life, both blow up my relationship and blow up my career. But I knew I needed to do it, but it didn't make it any easier.
There are a lot of sacrifices involved, right? Not least of which was the salary and the life that you had always known.
Yeah. I mean, I tried not to tell myself that or remind myself about it because I knew that it was just, it's easy to talk yourself out of things if you overthink them. And so what I did one day when I got back to Beijing is I went into my boss's office and at 8:30 in the morning, and I walked in and he's like, hey, what's up? I'm like, I'm going to tell you something you don't want to hear.
Oh, every boss loves it when someone says that.
Well, then I followed and I said, and here's the rules. You're not allowed to respond. I'm leaving for the day. We'll discuss this tomorrow. And he looked at me very quizzically, and I said, I quit. I'm out of here. I can't do this anymore. And he's like, but. I'm like, no, but. We're talking tomorrow. And I walked out. And
Why did you do it that way?
Because I knew that he would he's a great guy. I still love him to this day. But I knew that they'd throw more money at me or more stock options or make me feel guilty or tell me I needed to serve 2 more years and blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, no, I really just want to leave. And one of my friends had said, actually a friend from my Sydney days, Mike McSherry, had said to me, there's 2 ways to remove a Band-Aid, slowly and painfully or quickly and painfully. So I went for quick and painful, and I really succeeded at the painful part.
What was painful?
I hadn't been in Beijing that long, and other than my coworkers and my live-in girlfriend, I didn't really have a lot of allies or friends. So all of a sudden, it's just like, whoa, I'm the loneliest guy in Beijing. Like my girlfriend hates me, my boss doesn't like me either, and Beijing's kind of a lonely city when you're an expat. But my conviction was that I knew there was a future for me in doing this, but if I didn't leave Microsoft, then Room to Read would be a hobby. And the problem with hobbies is hobbies don't scale, right? What scales is commitment. You got to be all in. I wanted all my chips on the table. And so I realized the only way to do that was going to be to blow up my old life. And I didn't have $1 gazillion when I left Microsoft. I didn't have enough money to start a foundation. What I did have was enough savings that I knew I could live for 2 or 3 or 4 years for no salary to prove when I asked people for money, I could say, I'm not asking you for money to pay myself. I'm asking you for money to build schools and build libraries and get this whole thing called Room to Read off the ground.
Because someone might have said, why didn't you just stay at Microsoft, collect the salary for a while, get your ducks in a row, work on it for a couple of years, work out what you wanted to do. But you didn't have time for that. You knew that it wasn't scalable fast enough if you did it that way, right?
Exactly. I mean, it would have been probably safer financially. But I said, look, I'm pretty good at sales and marketing. And so if I stay here, I can make some additional money. But if I'm on the road constantly and I'm out and I'm trying to convince Goldman Sachs bankers and technology entrepreneurs and everybody else in the world who has money, and collectively, life to date, although we come from very humble beginnings, collectively, life to date, Room to Read's now raised over $500 million of pure philanthropy. Now, I would have had to have a once-in-a-lifetime exit from any technology company to even have close to that much money personally to be able to put in. So it turns out, and I believe very much in data, the data shows that it was a smart decision because it got Room to Read to scale much faster than if I had simply stayed at Microsoft, crossed my fingers that I'd get richer, and then hope that Room to Read would eventually grow. I think more importantly for me, though, it's that today's 5-year-olds, you can't tell them, hey, wait 5 years, I'll be back. Wait 5 years and hopefully I'll have a lucrative exit, because then that 5-year-old's going to be an illiterate 10-year-old. And the world has more than enough illiterate people. We don't need more of them. We need to help empower them through literacy and through gender equality.
That first library and those first books that you delivered in Nepal, what kind of books were they?
The first books we did were mostly English language books, mostly Dr. Seuss and books about animals and things like that appeal to kids. We realized early on, my co-founders and I, Dinesh and Aaron, we realized early on we needed children's books in Nepalese and in Vietnamese and Khmer, and the mother tongue of these children. The problem was that the for-profit publishers don't publish books in languages spoken by poor people, right? 2 billion people live on $2 a day. For them, children's books are an undreamed of luxury. So like any good entrepreneur, we looked at that vacuum, and so that vacuum creates opportunity. We have to become a publisher. So in 2004, with funding from Jeff Skoll, the founding president of eBay, we launched a local language publishing program. Dinesh, my co-founder in Nepal, went out and found local authors and local artists and said, you can be the J.K. Rowling of Nepal. You can be the Dr. Seuss. Right. We can create the next Tintin or the next Harry Potter type series. Tommy the Tuk-Tuk was one of our first books in Nepal. It's about this anthropomorphic, hell-raising tuk-tuk that screamed around the streets of Kathmandu, creating chaos. Very popular with little boys. From that humble beginning, we've now published 1,500 original titles, put over 20 million books in the hands of kids. We publish now in 25 languages. I often joke that we're the biggest children's publisher you've never heard of, because we're not doing it in languages that our kids speak. We're doing it in languages like Sinhalese, Tamil, Swahili, Arabic now to help refugee kids in Jordan. The program's grown way beyond my wildest dreams.
Because books in English aren't that useful to most of the children that you're trying to help. I would imagine all of the children that you're trying to help, they need to learn their native language first.
Exactly. And if they learn their native language, it's actually easier then to learn a second language like English.
Yeah,
so our goal
course.
is that every kid will eventually become fluent. And ideally, you also will give them the access to English, but you have to make sure you introduce the right language at the right time, and you have to make sure that the books are culturally relevant. So sometimes people will say to me, well, who translates your books? And I have to say, well, they're not translated. This is original content. So we're working with these authors, and so a child in Nepal might see mountains and yaks. A child in Cambodia will see a house up on stilts with a canoe in the backyard, right? We're not going to import Pippi Longstocking and Heidi into Cambodia and have the kids be confused. We want them to see things that are culturally relevant, and I think the key for us is local empowerment. It's not foreigners writing the books. It's local artists, local authors, local editors, local printing, and that also has the benefit of creating local employment.
The actual hands-on work that you do, a lot of people use as a sort of self-erected barrier to giving to charities is, I don't know where the money's going. Room to Read very proudly has, I think, the highest possible transparency rating.
We do, yes. Yeah. Charity Navigator.
Yeah. And you've worked, I know, very hard to cut overheads down. Tell me about the no Land Rover rule.
Well, yeah, the No Land River rule started because when I was first researching Room to Read, I was in Tanzania, and I also was, truth be told, climbing Kilimanjaro. And afterwards, I was talking to a British journalist, and he was covering the genocide trials, the Rwanda genocide trials. And he told me that when the United Nations came to town, and this is rural Arusha, Tanzania, the first thing that happened was they paved the parking lot, and they brought in like 20 Land Rovers. And he said, mate, don't ever let your organization be one of those groups that has a bunch of highly paid expats with a driver in the front and the expat in the back being driven around in a Land Rover. And then I heard this again in Nepal. One of the Nepalese early employees of Room to Read had worked for another NGO. And he said, with no offense to you, John, he said, every time a white guy shows up in a Land Rover, the price of cement quadruples, right? So we learned quickly, let's take a cheap and cheerful approach. We can get around on motorbikes, or I still get around on donated frequent flyer miles. We have investment bankers give us frequent flyer miles because we say if the overhead ratio is low, then every dollar donated can be stretched further to reach more kids. So we actually deploy 84 cents in the dollar directly to our programs. We have business partnerships with Salesforce for free storage in the cloud, Lenovo for free ThinkPads, bankers at Goldman and Credit Suisse give us frequent flyer miles. Hilton and Rosewood and Swire give us free hotel nights. The list goes on and on and on. But the important thing is, if you can shave 1 or 2 or 3 or 4% of your overhead costs, you can put hundreds, if not thousands, of additional girls in school because you are thoughtful about the financial model.
Tell me about some of those girls, the stories of some of the girls whose lives Room to Read has changed.
Well, I'm really proud of the fact that last year, and I'm super proud we're partnering with you because it's going to help us to make these numbers even bigger over time. But last year we passed the 50,000 girls scholar milestone. We now have 56,000 girls and young women who have been enrolled in our program, are currently enrolled, or who have graduated. And the majority of them, vast majority of them, go on to university, tertiary, or full-time employment. So even though they're the first in their family to finish secondary school in most cases, that would be good enough to stop there, but they're not stopping there. One of my favorite stories is about a young woman named Malenga in Zambia. I first met her when she was in 7th grade. She was shy. She was underconfident. She never pictured herself being in school. She would have never gone were it not for the Room to Read program. And then about 4 years later, I went to this rural school, and this woman said to me, "Hello, Mr. Wood, how are you?" And I look up, and I'm like, "Malenga, I haven't seen you." And she had blossomed through the Room to Read life skills classes into this, we teach the girls not just academics, they learn public speaking, they learn self-confidence, they learn how to make a sales presentation. And so I was talking to her about her dreams of going to university, and I said, "Malenga," and this is back in, I'm going to date myself here, this is when we had flip cameras, remember the flip cameras?
Yeah.
I said, "Malenga, why don't you just tell your story to the world? I'm going to film you for 90 seconds. And so I pulled out this flip camera, and almost like she had taken, and this is in rural Zambia, keep in mind, this is not even in a city. It's almost like she had taken acting classes. She waved and said, "Hello world, my name is Malenga. I'm a Room to Read scholar in Zambia." And I interviewed her just very like you and I are interviewing right now. And I said, "What are your hopes? What are your dreams?" And she said, "I want to go on to university. I want to work in a bank at one point. And after I work in a bank for many years and I make money and I buy some land, I will work full-time on girls' education." So I, with her permission, put this video up on YouTube. I put on my Twitter feed, "Please meet Malenga." My Twitter feed is @JohnWoodRTR. I said, "Meet Malenga, one of our girl scholars in Zambia." Posted it. 20 minutes later, my phone beeps, and it's a guy in Ireland, and he says, "Watch the video, loved it. I will personally fund Malenga's university."
Oh, wow.
She's now in her 4th year of university in Zambia.
Oh, that gave me chills. That's amazing. You blew up your relationship in China. You mentioned your wife. So there's obviously a happy ending to the story. You met someone who was more aligned with your life purpose.
An insanely happy ending. I didn't get married until I was 50. I thought I'd never be married.
How old are you now?
54.
Oh, you're a newlywed, John.
I'm still have that gloss and that shine.
Speak to me. What happened?
Well, I met Amy, and actually it's really karmic because I met my now wife, Amy, because she was a volunteer who helped get the Los Angeles fundraising chapter off the ground. She had read my first book, never knowing while she was reading the first book that this crazy guy on the yak would eventually ask her to marry him. But I went to the first LA gala, and the volunteers at the end of it were at the bar celebrating. My wife, Amy, had worked in the beverage trade. She'd gotten a bunch of wine donated, but she'd also gotten tequila donated. And she was saying to the rest of the volunteers, and she was much younger than them. She was like the junior member or the youngest member of the team. And she said, "I can't believe nobody drank any of the tequila that I got donated." And they all said, "Amy, it's a school night. Nobody our age drinks tequila on a school night." And I saw this woman I just thought was so beautiful and so athletic. And I said, "Amy, I will gladly do a tequila shot with you."
What a gentleman.
She poured
and also an opportunist.
Shots, no salt, no lime. We took them down. And we told that story at our wedding, which was just the worst possible thing to do. Because everybody at our wedding then was like, "Tequila shots."
Oh, God. That could have ended terribly, but I'm glad it ended so well.
If anybody out there is listening is single, I would simply say that my experience at Room to Read led to bliss on the matrimonial side. So get involved with Room to Read. You never know who's out there. We've got some incredible people involved.
Do you guys travel
together? And I'm not the only marriage, by the way. There are other Room to Read marriages.
Well, because I imagine you're meeting people who have the same kind of life purpose, who want to give back.
Yeah, you think about it. Like, who do you want to hang out with in your free time?
Yeah.
Do you want to hang out with people who are greedy, who lack values? Do you want to hang out with people who are driven to change the world, who believe they can? And like I always say, Room to Read, no matter how big we get, and we've now impacted over 12.4 million students. We have gotten big. But to me, it still feels like a family. I come to Sydney, I go to Tokyo, I go to Singapore, I go to London, and I see hundreds of people who are involved in it. And so it's just an incredible group of people who really believe we can change the world. We've got the data to prove it, but we also have a hell of a fun time doing it.
Thank you so much, John, for everything you do for girls and women and just everyone around the world who've benefited from Room to Read. How many people have been educated through Room to Read programs now?
We have about 12.4 million students across 15 countries now who have access to our programs. Our official goal is 15 million students by 2020. That's our official goal. If I was a betting man, I'm betting we're going to overachieve on that.
I'll be so shocked to see you overachieve at something.
Well, with our partnership, and we're really, very, very excited to be partnering with you, I feel like there's just a lot of great things we can do together. And that's, Room to Read's always been about what we call GSD, get shit done. Find like-minded people who don't want to make excuses, who don't want to sit around having tea and talking about all the obstacles and the barriers. It's just people who have a GSD mindset of getting out there, getting things done, making the world a better place. It can be done, it should be done, it must be done.
Thanks for listening to No Filter. If you want to keep a girl in school for a day, it's incredibly easy. All you need to do is Google Room to Read Donate and you can find out how. You can go to our merch store and buy anything in it. You can buy our New Lady Startup book. You can buy tickets to any of our live shows. And every single time you make a purchase with Mamma Mia, you are keeping a girl in school for a day. That's our promise, and that's part of the way that we are helping make the world a better place for women and girls with Room to Read. And if you work for a company that is looking to partner with a charity, why not make it Room to Read? Just visit roomtoread.org. No Filter is produced, as always, by Liza Ratliff. I'm Mia Friedman, and I will see you on Mamma Mia. Happy International Day of the Girl.